to welcome you to the V3 Movement webinar. We do this every month. We feature a practitioner, and that's really important to us. That's someone that's actually practicing locally, a beautiful way of being the church. And we're going to be talking about the virtue of dialogue. But before that, I want to introduce you to one of my teammates, Aaron Thomas with the V3 Movement.
Thanks, Dan. I'm the recruitment manager for the V3 Movement, and just wanted to take a quick moment to welcome you all to the call today, or the webinar today. My wife and I planted a missional church in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and then we've also founded a nonprofit ministry that walks alongside spiritual refugees and people who've experienced trauma or wounding in religious spaces. And I've also been coaching for the V3 Movement for the past 10 years, and I'm a certified coach with Giant Worldwide. And I wanted to welcome you and introduce myself because if you attend a V3 webinar, we offer a free growth call. And the growth call is it's about a 45-minute Zoom conversation in which I help you identify a goal, a problem, or a dream you have. And I help you identify pathways or opportunities to move forward in that. So if you'd like to sign up for a free growth call one-on-one with me, you can simply email me at aaron@the v3movement.org. And I think there's a slide. If not, I'll copy and paste my email in the chat box so that you all can take advantage of that. And excited to hear from Chris today and Dan today. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, Aaron's been with us for 10 years, and the V3 Movement has helped train over 600 women and men church planters who start incarnational, discipleship-centered, locally rooted churches. So if you're interested in that, I believe strongly in our little tribe. So if you want to explore more, we'd love that. We have someone I'm really excited to talk to today. I might get just a little giddy just about who it is, just because one of his books have been significantly influential on my spiritual journey and ecclesial journey of how to be the church. But we have Chris Smith, and he's a member of the Englewood Christian Church community, editor of the Englewood Review of Books. In addition to editing the Englewood Review of Books, Chris is the author of numerous books, including an award-winning and my favorite book, Slow Church, co-authored with John Pattison, and his most recent book, which is a doozy as well, The Virtue of Dialogue. All of his work in reading and writing and speaking are really to help equip congregations to cultivate a deeper life together. And Chris's work has this really particular, beautiful emphasis on conversation. And so I'm grateful to have Chris with us. Like I said, Slow Church was a big deal for me. And I really look forward to having some dialogue with Chris. So welcome, Chris. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the invitation to join you all for this webinar today. Let me get started, tell you a little bit about the book. And then I think for those of you that haven't been on one of these before, I think a lot of the time will be spent just in conversation. I think Dan has some questions for me,
yes.
And then we'll open it up at the end for Q&A for those of you who are on. So Dan, what's the specifics about if people have questions?
Real quick. Make sure that if you have a question to drop it in the Q&A function. You'll see that the chat function is shut down right now, so drop it in the Q&A function. And a little later in this webinar, we'll start unearthing those and throwing them at Chris, see what happens.
Cool. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the virtue of dialogue. Basically, the virtue of dialogue is built upon kind of the story of our congregation and our struggles to talk together and experiments in talking together. So I'm here at Englewood Christian Church on the Near East Side of Indianapolis, an urban neighborhood. Englewood basically has been in the same location for, I think it'll be 130 years this fall. Basically kind of gone up and down with the neighborhood, kind of started as a neighborhood church. And then like a lot of kind of neighborhood churches in the 60s and 70s kind of became more of a city church, kind of busing in kids and families from various parts of the city and kind of kind of rode an early wave of what was the church growth movement. I had a young pastor that was kind of interested in some of those um, ideas in the 60s, and we're kind of probably right around the size of what might be called a megachurch before there really was such a term. But in the 1970s, like a lot of urban churches, we were deeply impacted by the so-called white flight out of the city to the suburbs. And that caused a steep decline in the size of our congregation, but also just kind of left us kind of reeling about who we are. And kind of several points along our journey, kind of the leadership of the church here made a very intentional decision that we were going to stay put in our neighborhood, even though a lot of our members had kind of moved out to suburban places farther away. And so really kind of a lot of our journey has been over the last 40 or 50 years has really been trying to discern what does it mean to be faithful here, since we kind of made the decision multiple times, as I understand it, to be rooted here in the Englewood neighborhood on the Near East Side of Indianapolis. And really kind of one of the kind of really distinctive parts of our life together is our practice of conversation. And conversation started for us, our weekly practice of conversation started in the mid to late 1990s, almost 30 years ago now. But kind of, if some of you are older, or at least as old as I am, and remember kind of evangelicalism of the 80s and 90s, a lot of churches at that point had Sunday evening worship services that were kind of a light version of the Sunday morning service. But they were kind of in the 90s, by the 90s, they were kind of dying off in a lot of congregations. And that was kind of the situation here at Englewood. We had had a Sunday evening service, but it was increasingly becoming less and less attended and less participation in that. But we were kind of weird. We realized we couldn't keep doing the Sunday evening service like we always had, but we didn't want to give up being together on Sunday nights. So somebody in the congregation had the idea, why don't we just circle up our chairs in one of our multi-purpose rooms and have a conversation together? There were some things that had been kind of bubbling up through Sunday school classes or sermons or whatever that they thought were kind of worthy of talking about together. And so that's kind of how we got started. We had no idea there was no kind of ideology that was kind of guiding us at that point. And really it was talk more about this in the book. But this was kind of mid to late 1990s, just as the internet was kind of really starting to boom, definitely kind of pre-social media, any sort of thing. But we very rapidly realized we didn't know how to talk together. And it wasn't for all, and many of the reasons that we would think about today, that why we struggle to talk with one another. But we realized that we were a congregation of people that had come from a lot of different backgrounds and just had a lot of different we used a lot of the same language, kind of Christian language of terms like salvation and gospel and kingdom of God. And we used a lot of, but we had very, very different meanings about kind of how we understood those things. And that was kind of really what stirred up a lot of conflict. And it was pretty intense, those first decade, probably, to be honest. I came to Englewood in 2003. So the conversation had been going about 7 or 8 years when I came here. And one of the stories that I tell in the book, and I like to tell, is that I personally had participated in the conversations for a month or so, because my wife was on bed rest when we kind of came to Englewood with one of our children. And she wasn't able to come on Sunday nights. But the first night that she came, she took me aside afterwards and said, "I'm not sure that these people even like each other." And it was just kind of, there was definitely some sarcasm in the ways that people were talking to each other. And just kind of the tension and disagreement was pretty palpable in the conversation. And so, but but again, like I said, we were a bit of an odd congregation, and we just felt like we were doing something significant, and we felt compelled to stick with it. And we did. I mean, we lost some people. Some people actually left the church because of the level of conflict that was kind of stirred up through the conversation. Some people kind of stayed part of the church, but just kind of checked out of the Sunday night conversation. Um, but but we've continued kind of week after week after week. Now, like I said, going on 30 years. And what we've found with the practice of conversation, of learning to talk together, is that we're not, the practice of conversation doesn't kind of magically kind of make us agree with one another. But really, what the best fruits of our practice of conversation is that we're learning to trust one another. We're really it's really fundamentally a space of hospitality, of learning to receive one another. And one of the things that I stress in the book is that for us it was really important, and I think it's probably important for other churches that are exploring conversational practices, for the conversational space to be open. That is not just a I mean, in some contexts, in some church contexts, it might be a smaller group than kind of the whole congregation. But the fact that that it is kind of not just a kind of select group, but that it's open to anyone, and anyone can participate in the conversation. There's not just kind of passive observation. But can and would be encouraged to participate in the conversation. That sort of openness has been really, really important for us. I think it's been really important in our formation as a community together to recognize those that might be on the margins of our congregation for some reason, economically, educationally, racially, whatever, to have a space where we can hear them and hear their experience, and hear their stories and their ways of understanding and experience with faith. So that the practice of conversation has been really important for us, and kind of the heart of this is because, just kind of stepping back a little bit from our story and kind of looking at the big picture. I mean, we live in an age of deep fragmentation, and this, I mean, obviously, kind of polarization is kind of the ways that we talk about that, really. But this is not really it's a modern phenomenon, but modern in the sense of probably stretching back 400 or 500 years. To the beginning of kind of what is known as the modern age, kind of the beginning of the colonial age, the rise of kind of modern philosophy in Europe. There's lots of factors: the rise of industrialization and technology, and the increase in mobility, and then automobility, that really served as a great sort of fragmenting force on communities around, particularly here in the United States and across North America and maybe other parts of the globe as well. And just the technological rise, starting with the telegraph in the 19th century, and the photograph, and the ways that kind of connected us to other places, but also kind of served to fragment us a bit from the actual particular places in which we were living. But anyway, so we could talk more about that in the question and answer if you want to know more about that. But really, for all those reasons, we have this long history of fragmentation, and so we kind of find ourselves at the end of that. And it's easy to, like I said, to blame social media, blame the internet, blame technology, smartphones. We hear that a lot. And certainly, I think there's good reasons for being cautious about all of those technologies. Don't get me wrong, but they're not the primary impetus, or kind of the story is a much bigger, a much longer history. It's kind of led us to this point. But anyway, conversation, why is conversation important? I think conversation is important because I believe conversation is the means by which we find our way back to belonging. And I think this is one of the great gifts that the church has to offer the world, is this capacity of practicing conversation, being a conversational people, and practicing conversation, learning to practice conversation ourselves, but also inviting our neighbors into conversation, and conversation being a way that we exist with our neighbors and with other brothers and sisters around our states and country and world. That conversation really, one of the things that we found, and there's a chapter on this in the book, is that conversation really became a way of life for us when we intentionally practice it on weekly for an hour or two every Sunday. But it kind of spread outward from there as we became more mature in the practice of conversation. And believe me, we're still growing and learning and maturing, even 30 years in. It's a very, very slow process. I appreciate kind of Dan's plug for my earlier book, Slow Church, which kind of makes the case that going slow is good, and that kind of going fast and leaning into technological shortcuts really has done a lot of damage for churches and for our faith at large, I believe. And we could talk more about that too if you'd like. But conversation really is a way of slowing down and being attentive to what God has provided, particularly what God has provided in the people around us, particularly within church, the brothers and sisters, and who are these people and what are their gifts, and what does it mean for us to be ligamented together? I really love the image of the body. I mean, obviously, this is a very familiar scriptural image for who we are as the church, but really, our human bodies are the bodies that we exist within are conversations. They exist as conversational bodies. That conversation between all the various of our bodies. That, I mean, yes, kind of the brain or the mind plays a pretty significant role in that conversation. But there's also constantly ways parts of our body are talking back to our mind through fatigue, through pain, through good feelings, pleasurable feeling sensations, through any or all of our senses. All of that is part of a conversation, and it's the way that all of our parts of our body work together and cohere together and do really amazing things together. I mean, there's a time in our development as infants that an infant can see their hands and their feet, but they don't realize that their hands and feet are even connected to their body. And I feel like that's kind of a stage that churches get stuck in a lot of times, that we can see that people are there, but we don't really have an imagination for how we're ligamented together and how we can work together and draw upon the very unique sorts of gifts and skills and passions that all of the members in our congregation have been gifted by God with. And really, conversation is the start of a process of really seeing and hearing one another, hearing one another's stories, hearing one another's convictions about faith and theology. I mean, we all have that, and some of it maybe not helpful, and some of it maybe, and kind of having a space where we can sort through that and work through that, and particularly in ways for us at Englewood, it's been really important. Again, I know kind of church polity varies in a lot of places. We are in the independent Christian churches tradition, which is congregationally autonomous, and we're also pretty non or even anti-hierarchical in our leadership sort of structure here. But conversation has really helped us to kind of exist in that way. without kind of really heavy-handed sorts of authority or authoritarian sorts of leadership in our congregation. That because we can talk together, we don't need to necessarily kind of have big hierarchical sorts of leadership structures. So again, that may or may not, and there may be ways that other congregations in other contexts might adapt to that. But really, conversation has helped us to learn to function together, to be a community of God's people together. So maybe just a couple of things that I just would want to highlight as we're kind of wrapping up for the next 5 minutes or so. Just for those of you out there that are thinking about, I mean, how do we begin to talk together as in our particular congregation? So just a few kind of thoughts from our experience. First of all, I definitely want to emphasize, if you pick up this book and read it and kind of hear our story, please don't don't try to just replicate what we have done. I don't think what we've done. Well, certainly there's been a lot of mistakes that we've made along the way, things that weren't healthy, and we can talk more about that in the Q&A time if you want. But really, I mean, I think the benefits of conversation is really kind of learning to be attentive to your own context and how do we have conversations? How do we create a space where we can be talking together in ways, as I said earlier, that are open and really allow us to kind of see and hear the totality, the fullness of what God has provided in the people of our congregation. So first of all, just kind of that sort of caveat. Don't try to imitate us, but hopefully maybe there's some things that you might be able to learn from us, learn from our mistakes, at least, as you kind of lean into practices of conversation. So I mean, kind of the first thought that I have is just kind of find your own rhythms and practices of conversation. There's probably already spaces within your congregational life where you are having some conversations, and kind of how might you lean into those, and how might you make those more open to other people, to invite other people into those practices of conversation. That might be a Sunday school class, it might be a Bible study, it might be a small group or small groups. But how do you kind of to lean into what you're already doing? Secondly, I think really, and there's a chapter on this in the book as well, consider conversation as a space to practice hospitality. Kind of particularly hospitality in the Christian tradition is welcoming the stranger, but particularly, I mean, in many congregational settings, I mean, even our brothers and sisters in our congregations are strangers to us, and kind of how do we welcome one another and receive one another, and like I said, be attentive to what God has provided in one another, and kind of over time through conversation learn to have those who were once strangers really be friends, or even, as kind of Hebrews said, the writer of Hebrews says, angels, perhaps messengers of God's good news and liberating grace for us. Secondly, and this is one that I really try to emphasize a lot when talking with people about the practice of conversation. I mean, certainly churches can get into situations where they feel like we have to talk about this thing. We have to talk about sexuality. We have to talk about the political divide in our congregation, whatever. And really, I try to kind of put the brakes on a little bit and say, it's probably best, if possible. Yeah, certainly there may be things that you have to talk about, and I understand that. But if you can have practices of conversation that don't start there, and that really kind of allow you to have a little bit of a leeway or a lead in of kind of talking together and receiving one another before you get to some of those conversations, I think those conversations will have a little bit more grace and go a little bit more. I mean, they're certainly, it could be very messy, it could be rough, but anything that you can do to have practices of conversation alongside, or even before you get to some of those conversations, highly recommend that. And then two more things. One, to think of conversation, of entering into conversation in a Eucharistic sort of way. Um, Eucharistic in the sense of kind of not necessarily tied toward the sacrament of Eucharist or communion or whatever you prefer to call that in your tradition of the taking the bread and the cup. Though perhaps I mean the table is a wonderful space to have conversations around, and in fact, those of you that have read Slow Church will know that kind of the note that book ends on is kind of imagining church as dinner table conversation, which is great, but not every context does it work to actually have meaningful conversations around the table. So yeah, again, that's kind of one of the things you might sort out, but particularly Eucharistic in the sense that the Eucharist was Christ's kind of sacrifice for humanity, and being willing to enter in sacrificial ways, in ways that aren't primarily guided by our self-interest and kind of our own agendas and what can I get out of this, but really entering in ways that help to nurture the common good, nurture the spirit of Christ that is among all of us and guiding us. I think our conversations will go the best when we really, to the extent that we're able to, and again, maybe we can't completely set aside always our biases and agendas and so forth, but at least trying to do that and trying to be more attentive to others in the room and to their desires and to their questions and challenges and stories, I think is really helpful. And then finally, just to end on, I won't say much about this because I've already emphasized it, but just the openness of the practice of conversation. That, I mean, it's fine to have conversation with friends, and there's good things that come of that, and it's formative. But really to have conversations that are open and particularly across whatever sorts of diversity we have within a congregation, and to have those spaces really be open so that voices that maybe are outside the kind of mainstream of the congregation might be able to speak in and speak wisdom to the larger congregation. I think is really, really sort of important as we're thinking about kind of what our conversational spaces might look like. So I think that's where I will end for now and turn it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, this is a robust practice to have at the heart of a church's life together. This isn't a small addition. And I think what I hear often, and I'm wondering how you feel about this or address this, is often when I talk about conversation, there's like a latent anxiety and fear that it's going to blow up a church. I just had a pastor actually tell me, he's like, our church is fine. We're at peace with each other if we don't really know each other. And there's this anxiety of actually knowing, I don't really want to know what you believe, because that actually might create a problem where there is no problem. And so I'm wondering how you, how do you address, or how do you feel about that conversation is automatically going to lead to combustion in a church and blow things up, and potentially kill a church? Oh, it looks like we lost Chris. We did lose Chris. Well, let's take a Q&A.
Hey.
Let's see if we can.
Hey, sorry about that.
Back? Oh, that's
yeah, I'm
okay.
back. I don't know. Technology.
I get it. Well,
again.
that's why dialogue is better in person.
Oh, yes.
Did you hear my?
I heard just the very first part of it about the kind of fear of kind of blowing up the church. That was kind of where I dropped off.
Yeah, there's a latent anxiety and fear that conversation is going to potentially kill something that exists, kill our church. It's not seen as maybe it's not seen as something that's helpful. It could possibly explode. So how do you address that
Sure,
reaction, that thought?
that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think we were pretty naive about that possibility as we were starting
Okay.
out. Though it probably did come pretty close to the point of kind of blowing up our
Mm,
congregation. But yeah, yeah. I think that's kind of part of what I would call the sort of Eucharistic sort of posture. I mean
okay.
uh, that there may be some kind of sacrifices that we have to make along the way, even up
Mm,
to kind of uh, what we understand church to be. Again, I don't. I'm hesitant because I'm not the sort of person that's quick to blow things up or to take
yeah.
that lightly. Because I mean, I think those fears and anxieties are very real, but also, um, uh, I mean, we do trust, and I think we should, we as church leaders, I mean, including myself and us here in Inglewood, but I mean, we trust that God's Spirit is with us,
Right.
and that God's Spirit is fundamentally doing a work in the people of God, gathering
Yeah.
and sending and maturing, in the language of Ephesians 4. Um,
Mm,
that and so yeah, I mean, I think we do have to kind of move forward with the courage that the Spirit is with us, and that fundamentally we must be attentive to that Spirit, and yeah, I mean, some things may blow up or fall apart,
hmm
um
hmm
but but I think if the Spirit is leading into us into that,
Yes.
then the Spirit will give us the wisdom and the capacity to make sense of what seems like failure or destruction might
Yes.
actually be generative, how that might be generative.
Mm,
Um,
yeah. That's good, Chris.
uh,
I wonder what you've learned about how to curate that space in a way that it's generative, that there's not domineering
sure,
personalities,
sure.
that it's safe,
Mhm.
that power dynamics are we're sensitive to that.
Sure.
Because we probably have both have had experience of being in really liberating, beautiful, hospitable spaces of conversation,
Hmm.
and then being in spaces where that conversation has been harmful.
Sure.
Um, what have you learned about cultivating a hospital space?
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those areas that we've not done very well over the years. I mean,
Mm,
particularly kind of being attentive to the power dynamics in the room. I think we're kind of
mm,
even, I think that's something that we've learned a lot about over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, and are still learning
mm,
about. Um,
yeah,
so kind of coming relatively late in our practice of conversation to that. Um, but I mean, that's part of the process of learning and growing. But yeah, but
yeah,
one thing I should have said, and I didn't, I just kind of describing our practice of conversation. It's always been facilitated. We've always had a facilitator who does a lot of these things that um, you're talking about for probably the first half of or third to a half of our history of conversation. We had a single facilitator,
mm,
which was good for kind of consistency and a lot of different reasons, but it also, um, well, one, we found that the facilitator couldn't participate very well in the conversation, couldn't contribute to the conversation, so it was
mm,
kind of limiting his source of contributions. But also, so we've kind of shifted in the somewhere along in there, we kind of shifted to kind of sharing the responsibilities of facilitation and kind of recognizing
I
that there
see.
was a number of us in the congregation that had the capacity to facilitate, and it would be good to kind of to share that around.
Yes.
But yeah, the facilitator does kind of a lot of what you're talking about of kind of making sure that people
Okay.
aren't dominating or um, kind of being uncharitable in their sorts
Yeah.
of responses or ways that they're hearing other people. Um, So, and there's a lot of good resources. Actually, there's a book that it's
Mm.
been particularly helpful for me as a facilitator in that conversational space, and in kind of the other work that I do with congregations. A book from the business world called The Skilled Facilitator. Roger
Hmm.
Schwartz, I believe, is the author of that. It's just been immensely
Yes.
helpful of thinking about the dynamics of conversation and kind of what you're doing when you're facilitating a conversation like that. So those are a few thoughts. Kind of, and again, like I
Yeah.
said, we still have a lot to learn. Um,
Sure.
Still kind of, I think probably are a little too. Our conversations can be a little too heady, honestly, as one
Okay.
who's kind of tempted often to go into in that direction. Kind of
Hmm.
convicted of that myself. Uh,
Hmm.
so uh, so yeah, I mean, I think we're still kind of learning and growing in that, but I think you're absolutely right that kind of what you're describing are dynamics that we need to be attentive to in learning
Yes.
to have healthy sorts of conversations together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So that's a great resource. One of my past experiences of training was that I lived in Syracuse, New York, and we had um, an indigenous reservation right next to us, the Onondaga Nation territory,
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
they actually would facilitate training in how to facilitate conversation,
Oh, that's great.
which was their primary way of dealing with crime on the reservation. Was they
Sure.
started with peacemaking process and
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Restorative justice has really done a lot for
yes,
kind
yeah,
of introducing helpful sorts of conversational practices. And a lot of that,
yes,
as you pointed out, is coming from Native American communities,
yes,
indigenous communities.
absolutely. Yeah, and so there's that in my ignorance, that my introduction into that community, um, and you realize there's a long history of communities that know how to dialogue
Mhm.
without without crushing each other, uh, and so in many ways the kind of the evangelical church has uh, lost this. As an ecclesial necessity of being the body of Christ. It's always been kind of supplemental or maybe uh, a
Sure. I think it's
sentimental value.
maybe a way of putting that would be, I mean, it's a function of our modernity and our kind of
Yeah.
Westernness,
Yes.
Eurocentric. I think the sort of history of fragmentation, while it certainly had effects on indigenous communities,
Hmm.
tragic, traumatic effects on
Yes.
indigenous communities. I think that there's a historical sort of connection with kind of pre-modern sorts of
Yes.
capacities for conversation that
Right.
we've kind of lost in kind of all our desires for speed and technology and industry
Yes.
and all of those sorts of things. So
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I
That's
think,
great.
uh, yeah, I've been kind of a lot of this summer, particularly kind of reading a lot of kind of decolonial sorts of theology and kind of learning from um,
Yeah.
Native American or indigenous brothers and sisters, and
Yeah.
and and really resonating with it for some of the reasons that you're kind of pointing toward.
Yeah. Beautiful. The you call it the virtue of dialogue, and so the most people see conversation as a means, primarily just a means to an end, to accomplish something, to be efficient in getting something to pass or move forward. What's the virtue aspect of dialogue for you? Like, why is it a virtue in and of itself?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a way of being. And I talk about, so I have another book on conversation called How the Body of Christ Talks. And if you really want to take a deeper dive into the kind of the theology um, and kind of spirituality of conversation, that book is kind of uh, the kind of deeper dive into that. That's
Mm,
kind of my reflection on our practice, and also kind of draws in stories from other congregations in ways that I don't in the Virtue of Dialogue. The Virtue of Dialogue is really intended to be, I mean, while introducing the practice of conversation, it's also be intended to be and kind of structured to be talked about in churches as a resource
mm,
for churches to read together. And there's discussion questions after every chapter, and So in some ways, it's kind of an intro way that congregations can practice a little bit of kind of what the book is talking about. But one of the things that I talk about in How the Body of Christ Talks is that, I mean, God is Trinity, God is community. In being
Yes.
Trinity, God is community, and I think that's being created in the image of God is that we are created as communities in the ways that I described. Our bodies are communities of many diverse parts that exist in conversation, but we're also intended, I believe. I have the conviction that um, we are intended to live in community, in conversation, just as God is conversation, kind of
Yeah.
this eternal free flowing conversation. And I think that's really at the heart. Those sort of theological convictions, I believe, are at the heart of um, why it's the virtue of dialogue. It's this way of being, of this sort of economy too, of sharing. That's kind of that is the Trinity of. I mean, kind of there's this sort of economic sort of way of understanding the Trinity of kind of resources flowing freely from Father to Son to Holy Spirit. And similarly, the sort of life that humanity was created for um, was a community of conversation, of sharing. And I think obviously kind of we can do a lot of work with scripture, starting with Genesis, and kind of the ways that we've kind of resisted that sort of conversational life. But again, kind of in Jesus, and particularly through the book of Acts, I think the book of Acts has been really important to me in the ways that the early churches really were trying to understand what does it mean for the Holy Spirit to be present among us, and for us to be attentive to the Holy Spirit. And all of that was many layers of conversation that were happening, not only in Jerusalem, but kind of in all these other places as the gospel was spreading across that first century. So yeah, I mean, I think this virtue, I mean, the virtue is exactly what I believe. I mean, I believe is the good news of the gospel is this rich sort of interdependent sort of life that we are created, that God is, and that we created in the image of God are created for. But we have a poverty of imagination for that because of sort of modern age in which we live.
Right. That's good. A few years back, I wrote a book called Dialogical Preaching, which is a short little ebook. But in there, I did some research around a few hundred people and their self-understanding of their role in the church, and consistently I'm not remembering the research exactly, but more the theme that came forward was that we're primarily spectators of great communicators. So our primary posture is that we become spectators to good communicators.
Sure.
And so therefore, when we're invited into dialogue ourselves in conversation, there is this, no, that's for the people who are supposed to be talking, or supposed to be, who are really good at communicating. We watch people talk. We don't talk ourselves. And so I'm wondering how you address some of that spectator. A little bit, we're getting at the priesthood of believers, like what is our role here? Is it to watch the priests? Has that created passivity? Has that created like a loss of agency?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a number of things I could say about that. I mean, certainly we believe very strongly in the priesthood of all believers, and really the ways that God has provided for the fullness of God's life in all of our members, and really trying to discern what does that mean if God has gathered us together, all of us together. What does it mean? I mean, I think of kind of when Paul's talking about the body, about some members being more unseemly, and I think not to read too much into that, but I mean, I think my interpretation of that sort of idea is I mean, there are people in our congregation that we struggle to understand kind of what might their sorts of contributions be. And I think that having conversational spaces and learning to see and hear and know those parts of the body it really does help. I think where we've struggled with kind of the sort of question that you're having is kind of tied back to what I was saying earlier about some of the power dynamics and how it's easy for kind of some people to, especially the more educated people, to kind of dominate the sort of conversation. And I think kind of the flip side of that was it was very, as you were kind of have alluded to, it's very easy for others to just kind of passively kind of sit and spectate. And so, I mean, one of the things that we've done, well, two things that we've done really to try to work against that. I mean, one, sometimes we'll do kind of pulse checks, which we've learned from some other friends of ours, churches and friends, a church that we have friends in, that in their practice of conversation, they just kind of go around the room and kind of give everybody intentionally an opportunity to speak at various points in the conversation to speak and to be invited to speak in. And then people may say, I don't have anything right now, but at least it's an intentional way of kind of opening the floor to everyone. The other thing that we've done, and we're doing a lot of more of this more recently in the last couple of years, is just kind of breaking into smaller groups, kind of gathering for a bigger conversation, but realizing our conversation is probably 30 people, 25 to 30 people, which is really sociologically too big of a group to have conversations together and to really be able to adequately hear and see everyone. So kind of breaking into smaller groups for some of that time, and then kind of having those groups kind of bring some of the things that they've talked about back that were really kind of helpful for the small group, that bring that back to the large group. So that's another thing that we've kind of done to really kind of make sure that we're trying to engage as many people as possible and not make it possible. Again, there's danger in kind of coercing people into talking when they're not ready to, but definitely kind of encouraging people and really saying, we want to hear what you have to say. We know you've got something in your head. So,
how long does a Sunday night conversation moment? How long is that?
Typically about an hour. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer. We've gone through various things in terms of, are our teens involved? Are our teens not involved? Typically, we don't have small children in there just to kind of minimize distractions. I mean, sometimes people will bring an infant in or whatever, but generally we have care for some of the smaller children, and so we do kind of try to wrap things up fairly timely for the sake of those that are kind of caring for the children while the rest of us are in conversation. So, but then we also have this phenomenon that there's always the conversation after the conversation, which is kind of more informal, and that may go on for another half an hour, hour or more sometimes. Where if somebody says something and it's not you don't get a chance to actually say it to the whole group, or you want to talk specifically to that person, there's a lot of that sort of thing going on. And again, that's something that's kind of become its own thing over many years of practicing conversation together.
Chris, do you have I'm thinking through the concept of like a continuing conversation. So you have a night where you're talking about something. Do you talk about something for 4 weeks or 8 weeks?
Yeah, we do.
1 week or
so that's part of the discernment. I mean, it's almost always continuing. In some sense. I mean, like right now we're actually reading through a book, and actually at the end of 1 week we kind of basically just decide, are we going to stay on the chapter that we're talking about, or are we going to move on to the next one? So I think we've become a little bit better with kind of not letting conversations kind of sprawl out forever. I think there was a time that we spent like multiple years in the first couple chapters of Ephesians, which was certainly
Oh,
very
wow.
formative for us, but also I think frustrating and may have lost some people along the way just because that
Okay.
was kind of going on for so long. So I think we've become a little
Yes.
bit better, but also I think sometimes I wonder if we kind of swung too far the other way and just are trying to be so productive in our conversations
I
that
see.
we don't
Yeah.
have that space and the leeway to work through things in a little bit deeper way. Um,
Let me ask you a question that came in from Q&A from Brad
oh,
Sumner.
yep.
He says, thanks for sharing about leadership and structures. It makes me want to ask, how do you permission leaders in the community to participate in dialogue as full participants, not just answer people? Are there practices you commit to in that setting to help both leaders and others engage fully?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I mean, I think I've kind of
Yeah.
alluded to some of that in talking about
Yes.
our kind of practices of inclusion and inviting people to do that. I mean, I think kind of more largely across our congregational life together, kind of outside of the practice of conversation, we do have practices of really trying to empower people. I mean, the Angle books literature for that's been going now for almost 20 years. Well, not quite, but 15 to 20 years. Really kind of started because the church empowered me to do some work in the space of publishing and writing, which I had kind of had a
Mhm.
little bit of experience in kind of when I came to the congregation. So that's the culture of empowerment really does kind of it's in some ways been fueled by the practice of conversation, but on the flip side, it also kind of flows over into the conversation in the ways that we do try to be about um, seeing and hearing and receiving one another, and
Mm.
including kind of questions and struggles and all of that is kind of part of what we bring to the conversation, and we really
Mm.
try to gracefully and not traumatically uh, kind of allow people to speak that as they're led.
That's good. So it's not a surprise, Chris, that we're in a exceptionally polarized moment in time. There's always been polarization, and
Sure.
but then we're in an uptick for obvious reasons. How how do you uh, how do you address the issue that polarization is not a problem? It's not worth kind of trying to find a bridge, trying to move beyond the stance to see the other, to understand the other, to even be curious about the other. There are quite a few people that think polarization is not a problem. And so, um, for various reasons, because people on the other side are hurting other people. And so
Sure. Sure. No.
there's no reason to have a conversation with someone that you think is dehumanizing.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
and
I was at
I
a
get,
conference
yeah,
recently where that exact thing was brought up. There was a speaker who said, if one pole of polarization is fascism, then I'm glad that I'm glad that we're
sure.
polarized. And I just,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that we need to be attentive to that. Certainly,
sure.
again, I said a lot about the book of Ephesians, but I'm kind of reminded of Ephesians 6, particularly in kind of thinking about that sort of mindset. That there
Mm,
are kind of powers and principalities
yes,
in the world that are doing great evil, uh, great amounts of evil, and those need to be named and resisted and
yes,
unmasked and all of those things. But there are also real human beings that are caught up in those the work of those powers,
yes,
and I mean, are contributing to uh, the destruction of those powers. But they're real human beings, and how do we? I think conversation really allows us to receive humans uh,
mm,
across that polarization. And I think the good news of the gospel. I mean, again, kind of
yeah,
Paul's description of the church as ambassadors of reconciliation. I think I think that conversation really allows us to
Yes.
to receive people as creatures of God, even when we realize that they're caught up in really destructive habits. I think of particularly Will Campbell, the Southern Baptist writer, who was, I mean, very involved in the civil rights movement, but also was really connected, deep relationships with people in the KKK. Not that he endorsed the KKK, but realized, I mean, exactly the dynamics that I was describing, that that there were people that were caught up in this horrible evil, and that that those were creatures of God that needed to be loved, as well as those that they were oppressing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the start of an answer to that really good question.
That's good, Chris. Thanks. Well, we're at time, and we could probably go for another hour.
I'm sure we could.
Pulling all the puzzle pieces apart and looking at them. It's so good. I encourage everyone to get the book Virtue of Dialogue. I've been suggesting it to quite a few church planners who are starting out to, rather than moving towards efficiency in their communication, but to start thinking about how to awaken the priesthood of believers in conversations. So really good work. Thanks, Chris. This webinar will be recorded, has been recorded, and will be sent out as a replay for it to be shared widely. So thanks so much, and look forward to another conversation together.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for everybody who's joined us.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.